Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Fall. The gymnasium echoed with the sharp squeak of sneakers against polished wood as Marco McConnell watched his 8-year-old son, Derek, navigate the monkey bars with determined concentration. Saturday morning basketball practice had become their ritual, a sacred 2 hours where father and son bonded over dribbles and dreams of future slam dunks. Marco had built his construction company, McConnell and Associates, from nothing more than a pickup truck and an unshakable work ethic. At 34, his calloused hands and weathered face told the story of a man who'd earned every dollar through sweat and determination. But those same hands were gentle when they guided Derek's shooting form or ruffled his sandy brown hair after a good play. "Dad, watch this," Derek called out, attempting to skip a bar on the monkey bars, a move the other kids had been showing off. Marco's attention was divided between his son and a text from his wife, Constance. She'd been increasingly irritable lately, snapping at both him and Derek over minor infractions. The message was brief. "Pick up Derek early. I have errands." He looked up just in time to see Derek lose his grip. The boy fell hard, his left arm hitting the gymnasium floor at an unnatural angle. The sickening crack echoed through the space, followed immediately by Derek's agonized scream. "Derek!" Marco was beside his son in seconds, his construction-trained eyes immediately recognizing the severity of the break. The forearm was clearly fractured, possibly both bones. Other parents and Coach Wilson rushed over as Derek writhed in pain, tears streaming down his face. "It hurts, Dad. It hurts so bad." "I know, buddy. We're going to fix this," Marco said, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. He carefully supported Derek's arm while calling 911. Then Constance. "What do you mean he broke his arm?" Constance's voice was sharp, almost accusatory. "How did you let this happen?" "It was an accident, Connie. Kids fall. I'm taking him to Memorial Hospital." "I'll meet you there," she said, but her tone carried an edge that made Marco's stomach tighten. The ambulance ride felt eternal. Derek had been given pain medication, but he still whimpered occasionally. Marco held his good hand, whispering reassurances while his mind raced. This was exactly the kind of accident that happened to active kids, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that Constance would somehow blame him. Their marriage had been deteriorating for months. Constance, once vibrant and loving, had become increasingly volatile and critical. She seemed to resent Marco's success with the construction company, often making cutting remarks about his blue-collar background. Her own job as a pharmaceutical sales representative had given her a taste of what she called professional circles, and she made it clear that Marco's world of hard hats and work boots embarrassed her. At Memorial Hospital, the emergency department buzzed with typical Saturday activity. Dr. Nelson Harvey, a seasoned pediatric orthopedist with kind eyes and graying temples, took one look at the x-rays and immediately scheduled Derek for surgery. "The break is clean, but it's displaced," Dr. Harvey explained to Marco and Constance in the small consultation room. "We'll need to set it properly under anesthesia. It's routine, but given his age, we want to be extra careful about the growth plates." Constance had arrived 20 minutes after them, her perfect makeup and expensive outfit seeming oddly out of place in the sterile hospital environment. She'd barely looked at Derek before launching into questions about timelines and insurance coverage. "How long will he be laid up?" she asked, checking her phone. "I have a conference in Chicago next week." Marco stared at his wife. Their son was facing surgery, and she was worried about a business trip. "Recovery time varies," Dr. Harvey said diplomatically, "but typically 6 to 8 weeks in a cast, then physical therapy. Children heal remarkably well." As they wheeled Derek into surgery, Marco squeezed his son's hand. "I'll be right here when you wake up." "Okay." Derek nodded drowsily, the pre-medication making him groggy. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, buddy." The next 3 hours stretched like an eternity. Marco paced the surgical waiting room while Constance scrolled through her phone, occasionally making hushed work calls. When Dr. Harvey finally emerged with a smile, Marco felt the tension leave his shoulders. "Everything went perfectly," the doctor said. "Clean reduction, perfect alignment. Derek's going to be fine." But as they moved Derek to his recovery room, Marco noticed Dr. Harvey studying Constance with an intensity that seemed odd. The doctor asked detailed questions about Derek's medical history, his behavior at home, any previous injuries. Standard questions, Marco assumed, but the doctor's manner seemed more investigative than routine. Later that evening, as Derek slept peacefully with his arm in a bright blue cast, Marco stepped out to grab coffee. When he returned, he found Dr. Harvey waiting in the hallway with a serious expression. "Mr. McConnell, could I speak with you privately?" They walked to a quiet corner near the elevators. Dr. Harvey glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "Sir, this is unusual, but I need you to listen carefully." The doctor's voice was low, urgent. "Do not let your wife take your son home." Marco felt the coffee cup slip in his hands. "What? Why not?" Dr. Harvey hesitated, clearly struggling with something. "I can't discuss it. Patient confidentiality prevents me from saying more." "Then why?" The doctor handed him a folded printout. "This came back from radiology. The attending physician missed it, but I've been doing this for 20 years. His eyes met Marco's with grave intensity. "Sometimes the current injury isn't the real concern." Marco's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. It was a detailed radiology report filled with medical terminology he didn't understand. But one section, highlighted in yellow marker, made his blood run cold. Multiple healed fractures visible in various stages of healing. Right ribs 3 to 5 show evidence of previous breaks, approximately 3 to 4 months old. Left clavicle demonstrates healing consistent with break occurring 6 to 8 weeks prior. Small fracture line visible in right ulna. Healed, estimated 2 to 3 months old. Pattern suggests repeated trauma over extended period. At the bottom, in Dr. Harvey's handwriting, consistent with non-accidental trauma. Child abuse suspected. The hallway seemed to spin around Marco. Derek's previous accidents, the time he'd supposedly fallen off his bike and hurt his ribs, the shoulder injury from tumbling down the stairs, the wrist pain he complained about after spending the weekend with Constance while Marco was on a job site. How many?" Marco whispered. "At least 4 separate incidents that we can see on the x-rays," Dr. Harvey said quietly. "Mr. McConnell, I've already contacted Child Protective Services. They'll be here within the hour." Marco's knees felt weak. The woman he'd married, the mother of his child, had been systematically abusing Derek, and he'd been blind to it. "I need to call the police," Marco said, his voice hollow. "That's already been done," Dr. Harvey replied. "But I wanted to warn you first. Your son is safe now, and we're going to make sure he stays that way." As Marco stared at the printout, one thought crystallized in his mind with absolute clarity. Constance Schneider McConnell had hurt his son, and he was going to make damn sure she never got the chance to hurt anyone ever again. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. Marco spent the night in Derek's hospital room, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion weighing down his bones. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the highlighted text from the radiology report burned into his vision. Multiple healed fractures. Repeated trauma. Child abuse suspected. Derek slept peacefully, his small body finally relaxed thanks to the pain medication. Marco studied his son's face in the dim light from the hallway, searching for signs he'd missed. How had he been so blind? How had he failed to protect the most important person in his world? Constance had left around 9, claiming she needed to check on things at home. She'd barely looked at Derek, instead focusing on her phone and making notes about rescheduling her Chicago trip. When Detective Marvin Morrow from the County Sheriff's Department arrived at 10:30 p.m., she was already gone. Detective Morrow was a tall, lean man in his 40s with observant gray eyes and a quiet authority that immediately put Marco at ease. He'd spent an hour asking detailed questions about Derek's previous injuries, Constance's behavior, and their home life. "Mr. McConnell," Detective Morrow had said, closing his notebook, "I need you to understand something. Based on the medical evidence and what you've told me, we're opening a formal investigation. Child Protective Services will be involved, and there will likely be criminal charges." "Good," Marco had replied without hesitation. "Whatever needs to happen. I also need you to know that your wife cannot be alone with Derek. The hospital has issued a no-contact order pending the investigation. Now, as dawn broke over the hospital parking lot, Marco's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Constance. "Marco, what the hell is going on?" Her voice was sharp, angry. "I just got a call from some detective saying I can't see my own son. Connie, we need to talk." "You're damn right we need to talk. I'm coming to the hospital." "No," Marco said firmly. "You're not. Derek's sleeping, and you're not allowed here anyway." "Not allowed? What kind of bullshit?" "The kind that happens when doctors find evidence that you've been breaking our son's bones," Marco said, his voice deadly quiet. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 10 seconds. "I don't know what you're talking about," Constance finally said, but her voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. "Multiple healed fractures, Connie. Ribs, collarbone, his arm. All in different stages of healing. Want to explain how that happened?" "Those were accidents. Derek is clumsy. He falls, he gets hurt. Kids do that." "4 separate fractures over 3 months? All while he was with you." Marco stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Detective Morrow was just arriving for what he called a follow-up interview. "I may work construction, but I'm not stupid." "Marco, please. You don't understand the stress I've been under. Work has been insane, and Derek can be so difficult sometimes." "Stop." The word came out like a gunshot. "Just stop. Don't you dare try to justify this." When Constance spoke again, her voice had transformed into something Marco had never heard before. Cold, calculating, dangerous. "You think you can take my son away from me? You think some blue-collar nobody is going to destroy my life?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Marco. No idea at all." The line went dead. 20 minutes later, Detective Morrow knocked softly on Derek's door. The boy was awake now, carefully eating breakfast with his good hand while trying to figure out how to maneuver the cast. "Hey there, Derek," Detective Morrow said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "I'm Detective Morrow. I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes." Derek looked uncertainly at his father, who nodded encouragingly. "Am I in trouble?" Derek asked quietly. "No, buddy, you're not in trouble at all," Detective Morrow said gently. "I just want to ask you about some of the times you got hurt, like when your ribs were sore a few months ago. Do you remember that?" Derek's eyes darted nervously between his father and the detective. "I fell off my bike. That must have hurt pretty bad." "Where did you fall?" In the driveway," Derek said, but his voice was uncertain. "Derek," Marco said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You can tell us anything. You're safe now, okay? No one's going to hurt you." For the next hour, Detective Morrow carefully and patiently drew out Derek's story. It emerged in fragments, confusing, painful pieces that painted a picture of systematic abuse masked as accidents. Constance's explosive anger when Derek spilled something or made noise while she was on work calls. The time she grabbed his arm so hard it hurt for weeks. The way she'd pushed him down the stairs when he'd forgotten to take his shoes off in the house. "She always said it was an accident," Derek whispered, tears streaming down his face. "She said I was clumsy and fell. She said if I told anyone, they'd take me away from you, Dad." Marco felt something break inside his chest. He gathered Derek into a careful hug, mindful of the cast. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered into his son's hair. "I'm so sorry I didn't know. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." After Derek fell back asleep, Detective Morrow and Marco stepped into the hallway. "We have enough for an arrest warrant," Detective Morrow said. "Multiple counts of child abuse, endangering the welfare of a minor, possibly more, depending on what else we uncover." "When?" Marco asked. "We're picking her up this afternoon. But Mr. McConnell, I need to warn you. Your wife made some calls after she spoke with you this morning. Our investigation shows she's hired Vincent Romano." Marco felt his stomach drop. Vincent Romano was the most expensive criminal defense attorney in the state, known for getting wealthy clients acquitted on technicalities and procedural errors. "How can she afford Romano?" Marco asked. "Her sales job pays well, but not that well." Detective Morrow consulted his notes. "That's something we're looking into. There are some financial irregularities that don't add up. Her bank records show deposits that far exceed her reported income." As if the situation couldn't get worse, Marco's phone rang. "Unknown number. Mr. McConnell? This is Vincent Romano." I represent your wife. I think we need to have a conversation. I have nothing to say to you. Oh, but you do. Romano's voice was smooth, confident. Because my client has some very interesting information about your construction business. Tax irregularities, safety violations, some rather creative bookkeeping. It would be a shame if that information found its way to the IRS and OSHA, wouldn't it? Marco's blood ran cold. His business was clean. He'd been meticulous about that, but he knew how investigations could destroy a company even when they found nothing. She's bluffing, Marco said. Perhaps. But ask yourself, can you afford to find out? Drop the charges, Mr. McConnell. Agree to joint custody, and all of this unpleasantness goes away. Go to hell. I'll give you 24 hours to reconsider. After that, things get very messy for you. As Marco hung up, Detective Morrow was already shaking his head. Intimidation and extortion, he said. We can add that to the charges. But Marco wasn't thinking about more charges. He was thinking about something else entirely. His wife had money she shouldn't have, and she'd hired the most expensive lawyer in the state within hours of being accused. There was more to this story, and Marco was going to find out what it was. Because Constance had made one critical mistake. She'd threatened his son, and now she'd threatened his livelihood. She thought she was dealing with some simple construction worker who would back down when pressured. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. Chapter 3. The Hunt. Marco's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, the glow of the screen illuminating his determined face in the dim hospital room. Derek slept peacefully nearby, unaware that his father was about to embark on a mission that would either save their future or destroy everything Marco had built. It was 3 a.m., and Marco had been digging through financial records, public databases, and anything else he could access with his basic research skills. What he'd found so far painted a disturbing picture, but he needed help, professional help. At 7 a.m. sharp, he called Abraham Newell, a private investigator he'd worked with during some insurance fraud cases involving his construction projects. Abraham was a former FBI agent who'd gone private after retirement, and Marco trusted him completely. Marco? Little early for construction problems, Abraham's gravelly voice came through the phone. Abe, I need your help. Not construction-related. It's personal, and it's bad. 20 minutes later, Abraham walked into the hospital room with 2 cups of coffee and the same methodical demeanor that had made him one of the FBI's top financial crimes investigators. Tell me everything, Abraham said, settling into the visitor's chair. Marco laid out the entire story, Derek's abuse, the arrest warrant for Constance, Vincent Romano's threats, and the mysterious money trail. Abraham listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in his small leather notebook. How much do we know about her job? Abraham asked when Marco finished. She's a pharmaceutical sales rep for Meridian Biologics. Makes about $60,000 base, plus commissions. Good money, but not Romano money. Abraham's eyebrows rose. Meridian Biologics? Interesting choice. Why? They've been under federal investigation for the past 18 months. Price fixing, bribing doctors, illegal kickbacks. The FBI has been building a case. Abraham pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Let me verify something. While Abraham spoke in hushed tones to what sounded like a federal contact, Marco's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrow. Arrest made. Constance in custody. Preliminary arraignment at 2 p.m. Good news and bad news, Abraham said, ending his call. Good news is Constance is definitely involved with the Meridian investigation. She's been on their radar for months. Bad news is she's probably feeding them information in exchange for immunity. What kind of information? Patient data, prescription records, doctor profiles, anything that helps them understand who's taking bribes and who isn't. She's basically been acting as an inside informant while simultaneously collecting illegal kickbacks herself. Marco felt the pieces clicking together. So she's been double-dipping, taking bribes from doctors while reporting on them to save her own skin. Exactly. And that explains how she could afford Romano so quickly. Federal informants often get advance warning when things are about to go sideways. Marco's phone rang. Detective Morrow. Marco, we've got a problem, the detective said without preamble. Your wife made bail. posted by some high-powered law firm in Chicago. She's out. How much was bail? 200,000. Cash. Marco felt the familiar surge of anger. Derek was in a hospital bed with a broken arm from abuse, and Constance was free because she had dirty money. There's more, Detective Morrow continued. Romano filed motions to dismiss all charges, claiming the medical evidence is inconclusive and Derek's statements were coerced. He's also filed a restraining order against you, claiming you're mentally unstable and dangerous. He can't do that. He just did. You can't go within 500 feet of your wife. And he's demanding supervised visitation only for Derek. Based on what? He claims you threatened her over the phone and have been harassing her. Says you're using false accusations to hide your own financial crimes. Marco looked at Abraham, who was already pulling up something on his phone. We need to move fast, Abraham said. If she's a federal informant, they'll protect her. The FBI doesn't like losing assets, even criminal ones. What are you thinking? Abraham smiled. The same predatory grin Marco remembered from their insurance fraud cases. I'm thinking Constance isn't the only one who can play dirty games. She's been collecting evidence on dirty doctors, right? What if someone was collecting evidence on her? Over the next 6 hours, Abraham worked his magic. Using his federal contacts and some creative interpretation of public records laws, he began building a comprehensive file on Constance's activities. What they discovered was damning. Constance had been involved in a sophisticated scheme where she'd sell patient prescription data to pharmaceutical companies, then report competitors who weren't paying bribes to federal investigators. She'd essentially weaponized the federal investigation to eliminate business rivals while enriching herself. But the most shocking discovery came when Abraham accessed Constance's social media accounts through a contact at the FBI. Marco, you need to see this, Abraham said, turning his laptop screen. It was a private Instagram account under a false name. Photo after photo of Constance at expensive restaurants, wearing designer clothes, taking luxury vacations, all while Derek was at home with broken bones, being told he was clumsy and accident-prone. One photo made Marco's hands shake with rage. It showed Constance at a spa in Miami with the caption, "Finally some peace and quiet while the boys handle themselves, #no whining, #mom deserves this." The timestamp was from 2 months ago, the same weekend Derek had supposedly fallen down the stairs and hurt his collarbone. She was in Miami when Derek got hurt, Marco said quietly. Gets better, Abraham said, scrolling through more posts. Look at this. It was a group photo from what appeared to be a pharmaceutical industry conference. Constance was in the center, surrounded by men in expensive suits. The caption read, "My boys know how to treat a lady, write #business with pleasure, #living my best life." Abraham enhanced the photo on his laptop. 3 of these men are under federal indictment for bribery. 2 others are targets in the ongoing investigation. And look at this guy. He pointed to a tall, well-dressed man with his arm around Constance's waist. That's Dr. Jerome Baxter. He runs a pain management clinic in Chicago. Also happens to be married with 3 kids. Marco stared at the photo. She's having an affair. Affairs, plural. And Dr. Baxter has been prescribing massive amounts of opioids, way above normal levels. If Constance has been feeding him patient data to target potential addicts, the pieces were falling into place. Constance wasn't just abusing Derek and collecting illegal money. She was involved in a network that was contributing to the opioid crisis while betraying everyone around her. Marco's phone rang. Vincent Romano. Mr. McConnell, I hope you've had time to reconsider our conversation yesterday. Actually, I have, Marco said, meeting Abraham's eye. I'd like to propose a meeting. Just you, me, and my wife. Tomorrow, neutral location. Excellent. I knew you'd see reason. My office at 2 p.m. Perfect. After hanging up, Abraham looked concerned. What are you planning? Marco's smile was cold, calculating. The same expression he wore when outmaneuvering competitors for major construction contracts. I'm planning to remind my wife and her lawyer that they're not the only ones who know how to gather evidence. And I'm going to make them an offer they can't refuse. Which is, Constance confesses to the abuse, agrees to give up all parental rights, and disappears from our lives forever. In exchange, I don't turn over everything we found to the FBI, the DEA, and the IRS. Abraham nodded slowly. And if they refuse? Marco looked at his sleeping son, remembering every accident, every lie, every moment his child had suffered while he was blind to the truth. Then I destroy them all, every single one of them. Chapter 4. The Web. Marco walked into Vincent Romano's prestigious downtown law office the next afternoon with a leather briefcase containing enough evidence to end several careers and send multiple people to federal prison. Abraham Newell had spent the night compiling everything into a comprehensive file that read like a crime thriller. The office was exactly what Marco expected. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves, expensive art, and an imposing desk designed to intimidate. Romano sat behind it like a king holding court, while Constance occupied one of the plush leather chairs facing him. She looked perfectly composed in her designer suit, but Marco caught the slight tremor in her hands. "Mr. McConnell," Romano said without rising, "please sit. I trust you've had time to consider the wisdom of resolving this matter quietly." Marco took the remaining chair, but didn't open his briefcase. "Not yet. I have," he said calmly. "In fact, I've been doing a lot of thinking. And researching." Constance's eyes narrowed. "Researching what?" "Your extracurricular activities, Connie. Turns out my wife has been living quite the double life." Romano leaned forward slightly. "Mr. McConnell, if you're planning to make accusations—" "I'm not making accusations," Marco interrupted, finally opening his briefcase. "I'm presenting evidence." He placed a thick folder on Romano's desk. "Abraham Newell, former FBI financial crimes investigator, helped me compile this. You might want to review it before we continue." Romano's confidence wavered as he opened the folder. Marco watched his face go pale as he flipped through bank records, photographs, and federal investigation documents. "Where did you get these?" Romano demanded. "Public records, social media, and some professional contacts," Marco said. "All perfectly legal, unlike what your client has been doing." Constance grabbed the folder from Romano's hands, her composure finally cracking as she saw the evidence of her schemes laid out in detail. This is harassment," she stammered. "These are private." "Nothing here is private," Marco said. "In fact, copies are already in the hands of FBI agent Wade Morrison, who's been investigating Meridian Biologics. He was very interested to learn about your moonlighting activities." Romano had gone completely silent, his face gray as he processed the implications. "Here's what's going to happen," Marco continued, his voice steady and businesslike. "Constance is going to confess to the child abuse charges, agree to give up all parental rights, and disappear from Derek's life permanently. In exchange, I won't immediately release this information to every federal agency that would be interested." "You can't be serious," Constance said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Dead serious. See, I spent yesterday learning about federal informant programs. Turns out, when informants start engaging in new criminal behavior while supposedly cooperating, the government tends to take a very dim view. Something about undermining the integrity of the investigation." Marco pulled out his phone and showed them a contact entry. "Agent Morrison, FBI Financial Crimes. I'm supposed to call him by 5 p.m. today to discuss whether I want to file a formal complaint about witness intimidation and extortion." That's what Romano's little threat yesterday constituted, by the way. Romano found his voice. "This is blackmail." "No," Marco said, standing. "This is justice. My son has multiple heel fractures because your client has been systematically abusing him while running cons on doctors and pharmaceutical companies. I'm offering her a chance to walk away from the criminal charges in exchange for getting out of our lives." "And if we refuse?" Constance asked. Marco smiled coldly. "Then by tomorrow morning, the FBI will have copies of everything we found, including evidence that you've been feeding them selective information while simultaneously running your own schemes. The DEA will learn about Dr. Jerome Baxter's prescription patterns and your role in providing him with patient targets. And the IRS will get a very detailed breakdown of your unreported income." He paused, letting that sink in. "Oh, and your husband in Chicago, Dr. Baxter. His wife might receive some interesting photographs." Constance shot to her feet. You bastard. You can't destroy people's lives like this. You mean like you destroyed Derek's childhood? Like you tried to destroy my business yesterday? Marco's voice remained calm, but his eyes were hard as steel. I'm not destroying anything, Connie. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. Romano had been furiously scribbling notes. We need time to consider this. You have until 5 p.m. today. After that, I make the calls. Marco closed his briefcase and headed for the door, then paused. One more thing, Connie. Derek asked me yesterday why you were always so angry with him. You know what I told him? I said sometimes people are just broken inside, and it's not his fault. He turned to face her directly. I was wrong. You're not broken. You're just evil. As Marco left the office, he could hear Constance screaming at Romano behind the closed door. His phone rang before he reached the elevator. Marco, it was Abraham. We might have a problem. My FBI contact just called. Someone's been asking questions about our investigation into Constance. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest she's got protection higher up the food chain than we thought. Agent Morrison isn't just working financial crimes. He's part of a joint task force with DEA and Treasury. If Constance is giving them information about pharmaceutical money laundering, Marco felt a chill run down his spine. They won't let us touch her. They might not have a choice. The child abuse evidence is local, not federal. But Marco, you need to know, if she's as connected as I think she is, they might try to make you the bad guy in all this. Ow! Think about it. Successful businessman suddenly starts making accusations against federal informant who's been cooperating in major investigation. Easy to paint you as someone trying to discredit her testimony by manufacturing evidence. Marco reached his truck and sat in the driver's seat, mind racing. He'd underestimated how deep Constance's connections went, but he'd also given Romano and Constance something to think about, and he wasn't done yet. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. McConnell, this is Dr. Jerome Baxter. I believe we need to talk. My practice in Chicago, tonight at 8 p.m. Come alone. Marco stared at the message, then called Abraham. Change of plans, he said. We're going to Chicago. Marco, that could be a trap. Maybe. But Dr. Baxter just made a mistake. He contacted me directly, which means he's scared. And scared people make deals. What kind of deal? Marco thought about Derek, still in his hospital bed, still having nightmares about accidents that weren't accidents. The kind that ensures my son never has to be afraid again. Chapter 5. The Doctor's Dilemma. The drive to Chicago gave Marco 3 hours to prepare for what could either be the breakthrough he needed or the trap that would destroy everything he'd worked for. Abraham rode shotgun, occasionally making calls to contacts who could provide backup if things went sideways. Dr. Jerome Baxter's pain management clinic occupied the entire 3rd floor of a gleaming medical building in downtown Chicago. At 8 p.m., the building was mostly empty except for security guards and cleaning crews. Marco felt exposed as they rode the elevator up, but he'd come too far to back down now. The clinic's waiting room was pristine. Leather furniture, soft lighting, classical music playing softly from hidden speakers. Dr. Baxter emerged from the back offices alone, and Marco was struck by how different he looked from the confident man in Constance's social media photos. This version was haggard, nervous, and sweating despite the air conditioning. Mr. McConnell, Dr. Baxter said, extending a shaky hand. Thank you for coming. This is Abraham Newell. He stays. Dr. Baxter nodded and led them to his private office, which was twice the size of Romano's and decorated with medical degrees, awards, and family photos. Marco noticed the pictures of Baxter's wife and 3 young children prominently displayed on his desk. Before you say anything, Dr. Baxter began, I want you to know that Constance contacted me yesterday. She told me about your investigation. Did she now? Marco settled into a chair across from the doctor's desk. What else did she tell you? That you're trying to destroy her life out of spite. That you're manufacturing evidence to gain custody of your son. Dr. Baxter's voice shook slightly. But then I did some research of my own. He opened a laptop on his desk and turned it toward Marco and Abraham. The screen showed Derek's medical records from Memorial Hospital. How did you get those? Abraham demanded. Constance has been providing me with patient medical records for over a year, Dr. Baxter said quietly. She told me it was for research purposes to identify patterns in pain medication needs. I never questioned where she got them or how. Marco felt sick. You've been illegally accessing patient records to target potential addicts. I thought I was conducting legitimate research. Dr. Baxter's voice rose. Then he caught himself and lowered it again. Constance would give me profiles of patients with chronic pain, workplace injuries, recent surgeries. She said her pharmaceutical contacts needed the data for development purposes. And you never wondered why she was paying you $50,000 per month for this research? Abraham asked. Dr. Baxter's face crumpled. I was drowning in student loans, practice debt, my kids' school tuition. The money. God help me. I needed the money. Marco leaned forward. But you saw Derek's records yesterday. Multiple healed fractures in an 8-year-old boy, Dr. Baxter whispered. In medical school, they drill it into you. That pattern is never accidental. Never. He pulled up another screen showing a series of x-rays. I've been reviewing every case Constance brought me. Mr. McConnell, your wife has been identifying children with suspicious injury patterns and selling their information to pharmaceutical companies for behavioral studies. The room went completely silent. Marco felt the blood drain from his face. What kind of behavioral studies? Abraham asked. Pain tolerance in minors, addiction potential based on trauma history, effectiveness of different medications on children from abusive environments. Dr. Baxter's voice was barely audible. They were using abused children as test subjects. Marco shot to his feet, his chair hitting the wall behind him. You're telling me she was selling information about abused kids to drug companies? I didn't know. Dr. Baxter said desperately. She told me it was anonymous data for research. But you know now, Abraham said grimly. How many children? Dr. Baxter pulled up a spreadsheet. Over 200 cases in the past 18 months. All children under 12 with suspicious injury patterns. Marco felt rage building in his chest like a physical force. It wasn't enough that Constance had abused Derek. She'd been profiting from other abused children across multiple states. Why are you telling us this? Marco asked. Because when I saw your son's records, I realized what I'd been part of. And because... Dr. Baxter gestured to his family photos. Because I have children too. He opened another file on his laptop. Constance isn't just a pharmaceutical sales rep, Mr. McConnell. She's a data broker specializing in vulnerable populations. The FBI thinks she's helping them investigate Meridian Biologics, but she's actually been selling information to Meridian's competitors while feeding the FBI just enough real evidence to keep them happy. She's playing everyone, Abraham said. Worse than that, she's been creating fake abuse cases to inflate her database. Children who were never actually abused, but whose records she's been falsifying to sell to pharmaceutical companies. Marco's mind reeled. How many fake cases? At least 50 that I can identify. She's been destroying innocent families for money. Dr. Baxter closed the laptop and looked directly at Marco. Mr. McConnell, I'm prepared to testify about everything I know. I'll turn over all the records, all the payments, everything. But I need protection for my family. From who? Constance isn't working alone. There's a network of people involved in this. Other doctors, pharmaceutical executives, even some federal agents who've been looking the other way in exchange for information about bigger targets. Abraham was already on his phone, texting rapidly. We need to get this to people we trust. If there are dirty federal agents involved. There's something else, Dr. Baxter said. Constance is planning to disappear. She's been moving money offshore for months. And word is she's going to claim that you've been threatening her and Derek, that she's fleeing domestic violence. When? Marco asked. Soon. Maybe tonight. She's been liquidating everything she can get her hands on. Marco's phone rang. Detective Morrow. Marco, we have a problem. Constance never showed up for her mandated check-in with CPS today. Her apartment is cleaned out, and her car was found abandoned at the airport. Which airport? O'Hare. Security footage shows her getting on a private jet 3 hours ago. Flight plan filed for the Cayman Islands. Marco felt the world tilt around him. She's running. Gets worse. She filed paperwork this morning claiming you've been abusing Derek and threatening her. Federal marshals are looking for you for questioning. Abraham grabbed Marco's arm. We need to go. Now. As they headed for the door, Dr. Baxter called after them. Mr. McConnell, I meant what I said. I'll testify to everything. But please, keep my family safe. Marco turned back. Doctor, if you help us bring down everyone involved in this network, I'll make sure your family is protected. But if you're lying to me, if this is some kind of setup. It's not, Dr. Baxter said firmly. I've been part of something horrible, and I want to make it right. As they reached the elevator, Abraham's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then hung up with a grim expression. My contact at the FBI. Agent Morrison is dirty. He's been protecting Constance in exchange for information about pharmaceutical executives. But here's the thing. He's also been feeding information to those same executives about upcoming raids. So he's playing both sides? Just like Constance. And Marco, there's a federal warrant out for your arrest. Kidnapping, child endangerment, obstruction of justice. As the elevator descended, Marco felt the walls closing in. Constance had outmaneuvered him, turned him into the criminal, while she escaped with millions of dollars earned from the suffering of abused children. But she'd made one mistake. She'd underestimated how far a father would go to protect his son and seek justice for innocent children. Abraham, Marco said quietly as they reached the parking garage, how do you feel about going off the grid for a while? What are you thinking? Marco's smile was cold, determined, and completely devoid of mercy. I'm thinking it's time to hunt. Chapter 6, The Chase. Marco and Abraham had exactly 12 minutes before federal agents surrounded Dr. Baxter's building. Abraham's FBI contact had bought them that small window, but it was shrinking fast. My truck's compromised, Marco said as they reached the parking garage. They'll have the plates. This way, Abraham led him to a nondescript Honda sedan. Rental car, fake ID, old habits from my federal days. As they drove through Chicago's downtown streets, Abraham worked his phone, calling in favors from 20 years of federal service. Good news and bad news, he said after finishing a particularly intense conversation. Good news. I've got 3 former colleagues who believe our story and are willing to help quietly. Bad news. Agent Morrison isn't just dirty, he's desperate. Word is the Meridian investigation is about to collapse, and he's been taking money to make sure it does. How much money? Enough to retire comfortably. But if Constance disappears permanently, he loses his star witness and his payday. Marco's phone buzzed with a call from Detective Morrow. Marco, where are you? Somewhere safe. What's the situation? Bad. The feds showed up at the hospital an hour ago with a warrant. They're claiming you kidnapped Derek and fled the state. Derek's still at Memorial? For now. But they're talking about transferring him to federal custody pending a psychiatric evaluation. They're saying you've been psychologically manipulating him. Marco's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. They can't do that. They can, and they will unless we can prove what really happened. Marco, I believe you, but I need evidence. Real, provable evidence that can't be dismissed or discredited. We're working on it, Marco said, meeting Abraham's eye. Work faster. You've got maybe 18 hours before Derek disappears into the federal system. And once that happens, the call ended, leaving them driving through the night with the weight of urgency pressing down like a physical force. There's one person who might be able to help, Abraham said after a long silence. Agent Grace Hendricks, DEA. She's been investigating pharmaceutical money laundering independently of the FBI task force. If Morrison is dirty, she might be our only clean federal contact. Can we trust her? She's the one who taught me half of what I know about financial crimes. If anyone can help us, it's Grace. 2 hours later, they sat in a 24-hour diner outside Rockford, Illinois, waiting for Agent Hendricks. Marco barely touched his coffee, his mind consumed with images of Derek being transferred to some federal facility, alone and terrified. Agent Hendricks arrived at 2 a.m., a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with graying brown hair and the kind of intense focus that made Marco immediately feel better about their chances. Abraham, she said, sliding into the booth across from them. When you called and said you had evidence of a federal agent involved in child exploitation, I thought you'd finally lost your mind. I wish I had, Abraham replied, sliding the thick folder across the table. For the next hour, Agent Hendricks reviewed everything they compiled. Her expression grew darker with each page. "This is bigger than you realize," she said finally. "We've been tracking pharmaceutical money laundering for 2 years, but we could never figure out how certain companies knew which doctors to approach for illegal prescriptions. Constance was providing them with profiles," Marco said. "More than that, she was providing them with a ready-made network of vulnerable patients. Abused children, victims of domestic violence, people with untreated trauma, all prime targets for addiction." Agent Hendricks pulled out her own phone and showed them a series of financial charts. "Over the past 18 months, there's been a massive increase in opioid prescriptions for children in specific demographic groups. We thought it was just the crisis expanding, but looking at this data, they've been systematically targeting abused kids," Abraham finished, "and making millions doing it. But here's what really concerns me. If Agent Morrison has been protecting this operation, how many other federal agents are involved?" Marco's phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. McConnell?" The voice was smooth, professional, terrifying in its calmness. "This is Federal Marshal Wilson Short. I believe you have something that belongs to us." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Your son, Mr. McConnell. Derek is now a protected witness in a federal investigation. Any attempt to contact or retrieve him will be considered obstruction of justice and kidnapping." Marco felt his world crashing down around him. "You can't take my son. I'm afraid it's already done. Derek is safe, secure, and receiving proper medical and psychological care. If you surrender yourself for questioning, you'll be allowed supervised visitation." "Where is he?" "That's classified. You have 24 hours to turn yourself in, Mr. McConnell. After that, we'll be forced to assume you've fled the country, and Derek will be placed in permanent federal custody." The line went dead. Agent Hendricks was already making calls, her voice urgent but quiet. After 10 minutes, she hung up with a grim expression. "Derek's been transferred to a federal facility in Wisconsin. Officially, it's for his protection. Unofficially." "What?" Marco demanded. "It's the same facility where they've been conducting those pharmaceutical studies. Marco, they're not protecting Derek, they're making him part of the experiment." The diner seemed to spin around Marco. Everything Constance had put Derek through, and now the federal government was going to continue the abuse under the guise of protection. "We have to get him out," Marco said. "That's kidnapping a federal witness," Agent Hendricks said. "I can't be part of that." "But you can be part of exposing the whole network," Abraham said. "Grace, what if we could give you evidence of federal agents participating in child exploitation? Would that be enough to shut down this facility?" Agent Hendricks was quiet for a long moment. "If I had ironclad evidence of federal agents involved in harming children, I could get authorization for an emergency raid within hours. But it would have to be absolutely bulletproof." Marco looked at his watch. 3:17 a.m. 20 hours and 43 minutes before Derek disappeared forever into a system designed to exploit him. "Then we better get moving," he said, standing up, "because I know exactly where to get that evidence." Abraham and Agent Hendricks looked at him questioningly. "Constance might have run to the Cayman Islands," Marco said, "but she left behind a computer full of communications with federal agents. And I know exactly where she hid it." Chapter 7. The Key. The storage unit sat in a rundown facility on the outskirts of Rockford, surrounded by rusted fencing and flickering security lights. Marco had discovered it purely by accident 6 months earlier when he'd followed Constance there, thinking she was having an affair. Now he realized she'd been hiding something much worse. "You sure about this?" Abraham asked as they cut through the fence in the pre-dawn darkness. "Unit 247, Marco said. "She comes here every 2 weeks, always alone, always carries a laptop bag in and out." Agent Hendricks had reluctantly agreed to provide backup while maintaining plausible deniability. She waited in her car a block away, ready to move if they found evidence worthy of a federal raid. The storage facility security was minimal, a couple of cameras that hadn't worked in years and a lock that Abraham bypassed in under 30 seconds. Motion sensors, Abraham whispered as they approached Unit 247. But they're not connected to anything active. Marco cut the lock with bolt cutters while Abraham kept watch. The metal door rolled up with a grinding screech that seemed impossibly loud in the silent night. Inside, illuminated by their flashlights, was a carefully organized archive of criminality. File cabinets lined one wall, while a computer setup occupied a desk in the corner. But what made Marco's blood run cold was the wall of photographs. Hundreds of children's faces, with medical information taped beneath each image. Jesus, Abraham breathed, approaching the photo wall. It's like a catalog. Marco went straight to the computer, which was still logged in. The screen showed a communication program with dozens of ongoing conversations. Abraham, look at this. The message threads revealed the full scope of the network. Constance had been coordinating with pharmaceutical executives, federal agents, doctors, and what appeared to be childcare facilities across 7 states. One conversation thread caught Marco's eye. Agent Morrison. Next batch needs to include more severe trauma cases. Pharma clients specifically requesting children with multiple fractures. Constance, working on it. Have identified 12 new subjects in Illinois alone. Derek's case will be perfect template. Agent Morrison, good. Make sure medical records show clear escalation pattern. Need justification for extended pharmaceutical intervention. Constance, already handled. Hospital records being modified to show Derek as high risk for addiction. Perfect candidate for long-term study. Marco's hands shook as he read the messages. They've been planning to use Derek as a test subject from the moment he broke his arm. Get Grace, he told Abraham. She needs to see this now. While Abraham made the call, Marco delved deeper into the computer files. What he found made him understand the true scope of the horror. The network had been operating for over 3 years. They'd identified, exploited, and studied nearly 1,000 children across multiple states. Some were legitimately abused kids whose suffering was being monetized. Others were healthy children whose records had been falsified to create fake abuse cases. But the worst discovery was in a folder labeled permanent subjects. These were children who'd been removed from their families entirely and placed in what appeared to be a private facility in Wisconsin, the same facility where Derek was now being held. Agent Hendricks arrived within minutes, taking one look at the computer screen before making rapid calls to what sounded like very high-level federal contacts. This is enough, she said after documenting everything with her phone. I can get authorization for an emergency raid on the Wisconsin facility within 2 hours. What about Morrison and the other dirty agents? Marco asked. Simultaneous arrests. But Marco, you need to understand, once this raid happens, your son is going to be in federal protective custody for real. It could be weeks before you can take him home. But he'll be safe. He'll be safe. Marco looked at his watch, 7:23 a.m. 13 hours before the deadline to surrender himself. Do it, he said. Agent Hendricks was about to make the call when Abraham's phone rang. Detective Morrow. Abraham, you need to get Marco out of there now. Federal agents just raided his house, his business, and they're tracking his phone. They know where you are. Through the storage facility's grimy windows, Marco could see black SUVs turning into the parking lot. How long? Abraham asked. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Agent Hendricks grabbed the computer hard drive and as many files as she could carry. Go. I'll handle this from here. What about Derek? Marco asked. Trust me, she said, already on her phone with federal contacts. I'm going to bring this whole network down, and your son is going to come home. Marco and Abraham slipped out the back of the storage unit as federal agents surrounded the front of the facility. They could hear Agent Hendricks identifying herself and demanding to speak to the senior agent in charge. 20 minutes later, they sat in Abraham's rental car in a McDonald's parking lot, listening to police scanners and monitoring news feeds on their phones. Think she'll be able to pull it off? Marco asked. Grace doesn't make promises she can't keep, Abraham replied. But Marco, even if she raids the facility and arrests Morrison, you're still going to be wanted as a fugitive until this gets sorted out. Marco's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. McConnell, this is Agent Hendricks. Derek is safe. Facility raided 1 hour ago. 23 children recovered, including your son. Agent Morrison and 6 others in custody. You're cleared of all charges. Come to Memorial Hospital. Derek is asking for his dad. Marco stared at the message, hardly daring to believe it was real. Abraham, we need to get to the hospital. You sure this isn't a trap? Marco looked at his friend, this man who'd risked everything to help him save his son. If it is, we'll deal with it together. But I have to believe it's real. I have to believe Derek is safe. As they drove toward Memorial Hospital, Marco's phone rang one more time. Dr. Jerome Baxter. Mr. McConnell, I wanted you to know, I testified to everything. The entire network is coming down. And sir, your son is going to be okay. All the children are going to be okay. For the first time in days, Marco allowed himself to hope. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Memorial Hospital's pediatric ward had been transformed into a controlled chaos of federal agents, social workers, and medical personnel. Marco arrived to find Derek sitting up in his hospital bed, his cast now covered in signatures from nurses and other children who'd been rescued from the Wisconsin facility. Dad! Derek's face lit up when he saw Marco, and for the first time in years, there was no fear in his eyes, only pure joy. Marco gathered his son into the most careful hug of his life, mindful of the cast, but desperate to feel that Derek was really there, really safe. I missed you so much, buddy, Marco whispered into Derek's hair. The agents told me you were fighting the bad people, Derek said. They said Mom was one of the bad people, and that's why she hurt me. Marco pulled back to look at his son's face, amazed by the clarity he saw there. Yeah, buddy, she was. But she's never going to hurt you again. Agent Hendricks appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted but satisfied. Mr. McConnell, could I speak with you privately? They stepped into the hallway, where Derek could still see them through the window. How many? Marco asked. 23 children recovered from the Wisconsin facility. 47 federal agents, doctors, and pharmaceutical executives arrested across 7 states. Financial assets worth over $200 million frozen. And Constance. Agent Hendricks smiled grimly. Interpol picked her up in the Cayman Islands 3 hours ago. Turns out the islands don't appreciate people using their banks to launder money from child exploitation. She'll be extradited within the week. Marco felt a weight he'd been carrying for days finally begin to lift from his shoulders. There's something else, Agent Hendricks continued. Dr. Baxter's testimony led us to a pharmaceutical company executive named Roger Herrera. He'd been specifically requesting data on children with multiple fractures, what he called high-value trauma subjects. For drug testing? Worse, they were developing addiction resistance medications and needed subjects they could manipulate into addiction to test the treatments. Marco felt sick. They were intentionally creating addicted children to test cures. The evidence suggests that was the plan. Derek would have been perfect for their research. Multiple previous trauma, documented pain tolerance, and young enough for long-term study. The full horror of what they'd saved Derek from hit Marco like a physical blow. His son hadn't just been rescued from abuse. He'd been saved from becoming a human laboratory experiment. Mr. McConnell? Detective Morrow appeared at the end of the hallway. I wanted to apologize for doubting you and to let you know that all charges against you have been dropped. In fact, the FBI wants to present you with a civilian commendation for your role in exposing this network. I don't want any recognition, Marco said. I just want to take my son home. Actually, Agent Hendricks said, there's one more thing you need to know. The investigation revealed that several of Derek's previous accidents weren't caused by Constance. Marco's blood ran cold. What do you mean? We found communications showing that Constance had been paying people to deliberately injure Derek in ways that would look accidental. The bike accident, the fall down the stairs, those were orchestrated. Marco had to grip the wall to steady himself. She hired people to hurt him. A man named Vernon McGuire. He's been arrested. Apparently, she needed Derek's injury pattern to look random and accidental rather than obviously abusive. Marco thought about all the times he'd consoled Derek after his accidents, all the times he'd told his son to be more careful, to watch where he was going. Derek had been the victim of deliberate attacks disguised as childhood mishaps. How did she find people willing to hurt a child? McGuire was deep in debt to some very dangerous people. Constance offered him enough money to clear his debts in exchange for creating plausible accidents. Marco's rage, which had been simmering for days, finally reached its boiling point. But as he looked through the window at Derek, his son who was finally safe, finally free, he realized that his anger was no longer the driving force. What happens to all of them, he asked. Federal charges for everyone involved. Constance is looking at life in prison without parole. Morrison and the other dirty agents will get similar sentences. The pharmaceutical executives are facing RICO charges. And the children? All being reunited with safe family members or placed in protective custody with vetted families. The facility in Wisconsin is being shut down permanently. Marco nodded, feeling something that had been broken inside him for months finally beginning to heal. Agent Hendricks, I need to ask you something. When this goes to trial, will Derek have to testify? Not if we can help it. We have enough evidence from the computer files, Dr. Baxter's testimony, and the other victims that Derek shouldn't need to relive this in court. Good. He's been through enough. Marco turned to go back to Derek's room, then paused. Agent Hendricks? Thank you. For believing us, for moving fast, for saving my son. Thank you for fighting for him. A lot of children are safe tonight because you refuse to give up. As Marco rejoined Derek in his hospital room, his son looked up with the kind of trust and love that Marco had been afraid he'd lost forever. Dad, are we going home soon? Yeah, buddy. We're going home. Just you and me. Will Mom be there? Marco sat on the edge of the bed and took Derek's good hand in both of his. No, Derek. Mom won't be there. It's going to be just us for a while. Is that okay? Derek was quiet for a moment, then nodded with a maturity that broke Marco's heart. Yeah, Dad. That's okay. I feel safer with just us. As Derek drifted off to sleep that night, Marco sat in the chair beside his bed and watched his son's peaceful face. Tomorrow, they would start rebuilding their lives. Derek would need therapy, and there would be legal proceedings and media attention to navigate. But tonight, for the first time in months, Derek was sleeping without fear. And Marco was going to make sure he never had to be afraid again. Chapter 9. Home. 6 months later, Marco stood in the kitchen of their new house, a modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood across town from their old life. Derek sat at the kitchen table working on math homework, his left arm finally free of the cast that had been replaced twice as he grew. The physical therapy had been successful. Derek's arm was completely healed, and he'd even started playing baseball in the local little league. But the emotional healing had been the real victory. Dad, can you check this problem? Derek asked, holding up his worksheet. Marco reviewed the math, impressed as always by his son's intelligence and resilience. Looks perfect, buddy. You're getting really good at these. Mrs. Patterson says I might be ready for accelerated math next year. Marco smiled. Derek's new school had been a revelation. Teachers who cared, classmates who welcomed him, an environment where he could simply be a kid without fear or anxiety. The doorbell rang, and Marco opened it to find Abraham Newell holding a 6-pack of beer and a gift-wrap package. Hey, Derek, Abraham called out. I brought something for you. Derek ran to the door, still sometimes amazed that visitors to their house were actually welcome and safe. Is it my birthday? Derek asked, looking at the package. Better, Abraham said, handing it over. It's a celebration. Derek tore open the wrapping to reveal a baseball glove, a real leather mitt that looked professional and expensive. Abraham, that's too much, Marco protested. Marco, the settlement money from the federal lawsuit is going to Derek's college fund anyway. Let me buy the kid a decent glove. The federal government had indeed offered a substantial settlement to all the families affected by the child exploitation network. Marco had put every penny into a trust fund for Derek's education, wanting his son to have opportunities that his own blue-collar background had never provided. They sat on the back porch while Derek played catch with his new glove in the yard. The evening was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze and the sound of neighborhood kids playing in the distance. Any word on the final sentencing? Abraham asked. Constance got life without parole, Marco said. Morrison got 25 years. Most of the pharmaceutical executives got 15 to 20. And Dr. Baxter? 5 years, but most of it suspended for his cooperation. He's been working with the victims' families, helping with therapy costs and medical expenses. Abraham nodded approvingly. He made a mistake, but he did the right thing in the end. They watched Derek practice his throwing motion, his form improving with each toss against the fence. "How's he doing?" Abraham asked quietly. "Better, every day. The nightmares stopped about 2 months ago. He still has some anxiety around authority figures, but Dr. Williams says that's normal and improving." Dr. Williams was Derek's therapist, a specialist in childhood trauma who'd been working with all the children recovered from the Wisconsin facility. She told Marco that Derek's recovery was remarkable, partly because he'd never stopped feeling loved and protected by his father. "And how are you doing?" Marco considered the question. The past 6 months have been the hardest of his life, but also somehow the best. For the first time since Derek was born, he felt like he was truly being the father his son deserved. "I'm good," he said, and meant it. Really good. His construction business had actually grown during the legal proceedings. The publicity around his fight to save Derek had brought him more work than he could handle, and he'd been able to hire 3 new employees. But more importantly, he learned to balance work and family in a way he'd never managed before. "Dad," Derek called from the yard. "Watch this." Derek wound up and threw the ball with impressive force and accuracy, hitting the strike zone target they'd painted on the fence. "Nice throw, buddy," Marco called back. "You're ready for the majors." Derek grinned and ran over to the porch. "Abraham, will you come to my game on Saturday? We're playing the Rangers, and Coach says I might get to pitch an inning." "Wouldn't miss it," Abraham replied. "Your dad's been bragging about your curveball." As the sun set and Derek went inside to shower before bed, Marco and Abraham sat in comfortable silence. "You know what the best part is?" Marco said finally. "What's that?" "He's just a normal kid now. He complains about homework, argues about bedtime, gets excited about baseball games. For the first time in his life, he gets to be a regular 8-year-old. That's all any kid really needs," Abraham said, "to be safe and loved and allowed to just be a kid." Later, after Abraham had gone home and Derek was asleep, Marco stood in his son's doorway, watching him sleep. Derek's face was peaceful, relaxed, completely free of the fear and tension that had marked it for so long. On Derek's nightstand sat a framed photo from their recent camping trip, just the two of them grinning at the camera beside their tent, Derek holding up a fish he'd caught. It was Marco's favorite picture, capturing a moment of pure joy and security. Marco's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Morrow. "Thought you'd want to know. The last of the pharmaceutical executives was sentenced today. 18 years. Justice served." Marco smiled and deleted the message without responding. He was done looking backward, done dwelling on the people who'd tried to hurt his son. The future was all that mattered now. He walked to Derek's bed and gently adjusted the blanket, placing a soft kiss on his son's forehead. "Sweet dreams, buddy," he whispered. "Daddy's here." As Marco headed to his own room, he reflected on how much their lives had changed. They'd lost Constance, but gained something infinitely more valuable. A relationship built on trust, honesty, and unconditional love. Derek would never again have to wonder if he was safe in his own home. He would never again have to endure accidents that weren't accidents. He would never again have to carry the burden of someone else's cruelty and mental illness. And Marco would never again fail to see the signs when someone tried to hurt his son. They were a team now, father and son against the world, but in the best possible way. They had each other, they had their health, and they had a future full of baseball games, camping trips, homework help, and all the ordinary moments that make up an extraordinary life. For Marco McConnell, who had once thought he'd lost everything, it was more than enough. It was everything.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.